The Greek tragedy Antigone was written by Sophocles about 2,500 years ago. But even though the play was written so long ago, it still remains remarkably accessible and relevant today. Sophocles is considered one of the greatest writers of tragedy in ancient Athens. So as we walk through this play, we need to get a clear understanding of the definition and conventions of Greek tragedy. I'd also like to point out that this play is part of what is known as the Oedipus cycle. This is a collection of 3 plays, starting with Oedipus Rex, also known as Oedipus the King, followed by Oedipus at Colonus, and then concluding with Antigone. So Antigone is the last of these 3 plays in chronological order. I'd like to break down this play into 7 key areas and focus on one area at a time. And each of these 7 areas contains a dialogue or a monologue. So let's start with the first dialogue between 2 sisters, Antigone and Ismene. Now the setting is set for us. We know that we are in the city of Thebes, and we are here at the royal palace. Antigone asks, "What of this edict, which they say the commander has proclaimed to the whole people?" So we need to figure out what is this edict that Antigone is referring to. Ismene provides some information, some kind of background information for us. She says, "We lost 2 brothers who died on one day by a double blow." Now, what we find out is that during the Civil War, as people were fighting, these 2 brothers of Ismene and Antigone are fighting on opposite sides. So just like in America with the Civil War, we might have one brother fighting for the Union in the North and one fighting for the Confederacy in the South. We've had these 2 brothers fighting on 2 different sides of the Civil War. They've met each other in battle, and they've both died at the other brother's hand. So they basically killed each other in battle. All right. Now, Antigone says that Creon, and we find out that Creon has become the new king here, the new king of Thebes. He's taken over, and we can assume that Creon is the one who has provided some type of edict. But Antigone says Creon will give the one of our 2 brothers honor in the tomb and the other none. So here's the crisis, is that when we think about a typical plot of a play, we have this exposition where you kind of figure out what's going on. Then there's some type of inciting action that leads to the rising action. Then we have that climax or turning point, followed by the falling action, and then the resolution or denouement. Okay, so that's sort of the standard plot of a drama. And so we're starting to set up the conflict here, which is that Creon is going to honor one of the brothers, and he's not going to honor the other one. So the 2 brothers here are Eteocles and Polynices. Now, Eteocles, she says, with just observance treated, as law provides, he has hidden under the earth to have full honor with the dead below. So you can understand some of the customs here that it's important to put the body under the earth, to bury the body so that the soul can go on to the afterlife. So Eteocles has been fighting on the side of Creon and has getting full honors. But Polynices, who is fighting on the opposite side, it says, his corpse, who died in pain, they say he has proclaimed to the whole town that none may bury him and none bewail, but leave him unwept, untombed, a rich, sweet sight for the hungry birds beholding and devouring. So we're not allowed to go over to the body and cry on the body and weep and to bury the body and to have some type of funeral. We're not allowed to do that. We just need to leave that body out there on the ground as it rots, and the animals are going to come and rip it apart and eat it. And so this is the terrible thought to Antigone. How can we sit back and let our brother be treated this way? So we find out this edict here says that anyone who dares to attempt the act, anybody who goes and tries to bury Polynices, will die by public stoning in the town. So the edict says you must leave these people out there on the ground, do not bury them. And if you do that, you're going to be publicly stoned. You're going to be executed. So Antigone, her point of speaking to her sister is, are you with me here? I'm going to go out there, and I don't care what Creon says. I don't care about this edict. I'm going to go bury my brother. I'm going to show my brother the proper respect and love that he deserves. So are you with me? Now we see two very different responses. Antigone says, I don't care about the edict. I'm going to go do what's right and care for my brother. But Ismene says, to bury him, you mean when it's forbidden? Are you really going to do something? Don't you know that it's against the law to do that? And she says, well, it's not for him to keep me from my own. And this starts to give us our first glimpse of the theme of this play and why it's so relevant today, because we're often in a situation where we have a dilemma. Do we follow our own heart? Do we follow our own conscience and do what we think is right? Or do we follow the law? Do we obey some type of law that we feel is unethical or even immoral? And you think about, for example, conscientious objectors who said, what, I don't think that the war is right. I don't agree with the war in Vietnam. I don't think it's a moral cause. And so I do not want to be drafted into the military and fight in a war that I object to. And so I am going to choose to follow my conscience and my own sense of right and wrong. And so think about all the times in your own life where you're kind of forced to stand up for what you believe in is right. Do you kind of go along with society? Do you conform to the social rules or the way things are going? Or do you stand true to your own sense of right and wrong, to your own conscience, your inner voice? And there's a pro and con, there's a good and a bad. So we can kind of see the benefits of both Antigone's position and Ismene's position. We don't want to always just do whatever we think is best for ourselves. We can't, if every single person in society just did whatever they wanted and followed their own inner voice, then society could break down and there would be kind of anarchy and chaos. So when we get later to the play and we listen to the voice of Creon, he's going to make a strong case for the importance of maintaining social order. That what happens when everybody just does their own thing and does whatever they want to do? What happens to society? Does it break down? And once society breaks down, people seem to have no longer have the right or the ability to do what they want. And let me use an analogy to explain what I mean here. Imagine if everybody could drive a car however they wanted. They could drive in whatever speed. They could drive in whatever direction. If you want to drive on the left side of the road, right side of the road, fast, slow, no right of way, no traffic signs, no traffic lights. Just let everybody do whatever they want. Everybody just follows their inner voice and drives the way they think they should drive or the way they want to drive. Now, would driving be safer or riskier, right? Would it take longer to get someplace, or would we get someplace faster? Are you going to be more free? If everybody were free to do whatever they wanted on the road, we would be, in a sense, less free. There'd be traffic jams and all kinds of accidents. And so where do we find that right balance between following the laws, following the rules, and being free? So Antigone says, look, it's not for him to keep me. The king has no right to make an edict like this. You can't tell people they're not allowed to mourn and honor their fallen family members, and they're not allowed to give a burial. The state does not have a right to do that. But Ismene does not want to get in trouble. She says, look, we'll perish terribly if we violate the law. You try to make waves here, you rock the boat, just she says, remember that we are women. And this is the theme we're going to look at also through the play, is the kind of role and the views about sex. Creon keeps talking about that as a man, he does not want to be losing out to a woman. So there's a lot of sexual politics going on here too. That's something interesting to focus on. And she goes, look, we don't have any power. First of all, our family is no longer in charge. Okay. We find out that these two girls, they are the daughters of Oedipus. Remember that Oedipus cycle? Oedipus the king? Well, that's their father, right? So it says our family's no longer in charge. And we're not men, we're women. We don't really have any status or power in society. So what's the point of making a big kind of being rebellious and starting some type of controversy here? We're just going to cause more trouble. We're not going to be able to do anything, and we're going to just cause more trouble. She says, since we are subject to stronger power, we must hear these orders, or even if they're worse, no matter how bad the orders are, we have to kind of follow them. So she says, so I'm going to ask for forgiveness because really I have no power to do anything about this. So as far as the dead, I'm going to ask for their forgiveness, but I'm going to obey the men in power right now. This wild and futile action, she says, makes no sense. So that's Ismene's side of the argument. So that's what I want you to do in part one here, is to understand what basically Ismene is saying. Reduce it down, paraphrase this, summarize her main idea. What is she saying? She's saying, look, there's nothing we can do. We're only going to make things worse. So let's just leave him out there to rot on the ground. And we can always ask for forgiveness later. But we need to follow the powers that are in charge, and to do otherwise would be futile and crazy. Well, Antigone says, well, I don't mind death, right? I'm willing to do the right thing, even if it means I get killed. Because she says here that if once I die, I'm going to have to see my brother, and I'm going to have to justify my actions. And I love this line here. She says, longer the time in which to please the dead than the time with those up here. So she says, okay, let's say that I disobey the king and I get killed. I will now go to the underworld. I'll go to Hades, or whatever. I'll go to the afterlife, and I will meet my dead brother, and I will be with my brother forever, for eternity. Now let's imagine that we follow your course of actions, Ismene. You follow the laws and edicts of Creon, and you live a long life. And then you die. And then once you die, you have to then go and confront your brother. Even if you live another 70 years, give it 100 years. Let's say you live another 100 years. That's nothing compared to the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years that you're going to live with your dead brother. So we're going to live a much longer time after death than we are going to be before death. So why are we so concerned about what we're going to get here rather than thinking about the long-term eternal consequences of something? So she says, longer the time in which to please the dead than the time with those up here. So let's think in the larger picture here. Let's put things into context, and let's have an eternal perspective here and not just look on saving our butts right now. So she says, I'm going to do what's right, even if it costs me my own life. And then she continues that thought here by saying, I know I please those whom I most should please, which means when it comes to following the edict of the king versus the morality of the gods, she says, I'm going to follow and obey God rather than the king. My religion or my moral beliefs are more important than my political views. Morality is more important than politics. Right? God is more important than the king. So I need to be pleasing my own family members, right? So I know I please those whom I most should please. So she's saying I have my priorities straightened out. I know what's important and what's not important. You're actually trying to follow along and do what the government's telling you. And in doing that, you're violating the morality of the gods, and you're violating your own loyalty and love for your own family. So she says to Ismene, you don't have your priorities straight. You're so scared of some type of punishment that you're doing the wrong thing. But Ismene answers back, wrong from the start to chase what cannot be. She says, no, you're not going to be, whatever you're doing is futile. It's not going to work. So it's a stupid idea to do something that's not going to work anyway. All right. So you can see, we like to think that we side with Antigone, that we're always have the courage to always do what is right and stand firm, even when society is against us. But we know that often we don't do that, right? We can kind of see some of Antigone and Ismene in ourselves. Sometimes we try to just kind of go along with the way things are and keep out of trouble. And other times we feel that we want to be courageous and stand up for something, right? So that's the first conversation to focus on, is between Ismene and Antigone. All right. Now the second point I want to show you is more of a monologue. This is Creon giving this speech. And Creon, we can see, kind of falls in line with the thinking of Ismene. Creon is the new king, and he starts making a powerful defense here of the importance of the society or the state or the government. Why is it important to have laws, to have rules? We can't just have a state of anarchy. We must have some type of structure, because only in a society that has rules and structure can people be free to pursue their own interest and to develop their friendships. So if you choose the friends over the government will fall apart, and then you can't have any friends because society will be a complete mess. So Creon says, ironically, only if you put the state above your friendships can you actually have a condition in life in which to pursue friendships. All right. So here's what he says: my friends, the very gods who shook the state with mighty surge have set it straight again. So after this long, terrible time of upheaval and civil war, order has been restored, and now I'm in charge. Okay. He also brings up the fate of the two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, and says, when they two perished by a double fate, on one day struck and striking, and defiled each by each other's hand. See, they basically killed each other by sword. They stabbed each other and died. Now it comes that I hold all the power and the royal throne. So maybe those brothers each had a claim to the throne. Each one wanted to be the king. And so they went to war and killed each other. So now we find out that a close relative named Creon is taking over. There's nobody else really in line for this throne, so I'm going to take it for myself. Right? He says, because I am the legitimate heir to the throne because of my close family connections. All right. Now here's what he says. Creon's statement is, I believe that he who controls the state, if he holds not to the best plans of all, but locks his tongue up to some kind of fear, he is worst of all who are or were. He who counts another great friend than his own fatherland, I put him nowhere. So if you put your friends, your loyalties to your friends and family above your loyalty to your nation or your government or your country, then he says, I put that person nowhere, that you're not a great person. It's not a good thing to put your friend above the fatherland, the homeland, right? Your country. Why? because he says here on line 180, it's she, the fatherland. It's weird that we say fatherland and then switch to she. It's the land who saves us, sailing straight, and only so can we have friends at all. So only once government is in place and working well, when we have law and order, then we can have a society in which to pursue friends. So we have to set our priorities. We have to put state or government or nation, put our patriotism first above our friendships and family ties. All right, so he gives this summary again. Eteocles defied defending this our town, and he's getting an honorable burial. But his brother Polynices, right, he is the enemy, and so he gets no burial. We're going to leave him unburied, leave his corpse disgraced, a dinner for birds and for the dog. So he kind of reinforces what the two sisters had said here. All right. So I want you to understand that important point. Again, in part 2, your goal here is to figure out, okay, let me paraphrase this. Let me put it into my own words. What is basically the main point of Creon's speech here? And his speech is that I need, as the king, to establish order and maintain it, and I cannot put family and friends above my duty and responsibilities to the state. The state, the government, he thinks that is the greater good. But remember, Antigone is saying, okay, the government might be a greater good, but heaven, the gods, that is the greatest good, and I need to put my loyalty to that. So what do we put? Do we put family above government, or do we put government above family? Okay, that's what we're seeing going on here, right? Now the guard comes in and says, hey, I got some news for you. Somebody has just thrown some dirt onto the body of Polynices. And has completed some type of funeral rituals here. So somebody has violated your edict. Now this continues this point that Creon is making about what happens when people do not put their loyalty to the state above all else. And so he gets the sense, and he kind of suspects the guard, or he suspects people for being greedy, that somehow they've been bribed, that the guards have, because you can't imagine, like, how could somebody go up there? I've set a guard to watch the body. So the only way somebody could have come up there and buried the body is if they had bribed the guards and said, here, I'm going to give you some money. You look the other way while I throw some dirt on my brother's body and honor him. So he talks about what happens when personal desires and greed. He says, no current standard among men's as bad as silver currency. This destroys the state. This drives men from their homes. This wicked teacher drives solid citizens to acts of shame. When people start getting greedy and act out of their own self-interest, and they don't care about the larger or greater good, right? It shows men how to act as criminals, and how the deeds and to know the deeds of utter unholiness. So he says, look, I really suspect there's been some bribery here, and basically your neck's on the line, he says to the guard. If you don't find the very man whose hands buried the corpse and bring him for me to see, not death alone shall be enough for you, till living strung up you make clear the crime. I'll string you up and make an example out of you unless you bring me the person who did this. Because if you can't bring me the person who did this, then I'm going to hold you responsible and say that you had accepted a bribe because of your greed, and I'm going to make an example of you. So he says here to the guard, go polish up your guesswork. If you don't show me the doers, you will have to say that wicked payments work their own revenge. And the guard says, I pray he's found, but yes or no, taken or not, as luck may settle it, you won't see me returning to this place. Saved when I neither hoped nor thought to be, I owe the gods a mighty debt of thanks. So the guards just happy that he got to escape here. He says, I'm not going to come back here. I don't know whether they find the actual perpetrator or not. I don't care. I'm not coming anywhere near here again. All right. Part 3. Notice there's an interesting feature about this drama, and it's the presence of what is called the chorus. All right, so it's very interesting. What role does the chorus play? The chorus sometimes represents kind of in some ways, the voice of the author. In some ways, it represents the voice of us, the readers. The chorus brings up many themes and ideas throughout the play. And the one that I really want to focus on is often called the Ode to Man. This is kind of a beautiful poem here, kind of considering the nature of mankind or human beings, the ode to human beings, right? The ode to man. It says, and by man, they mean human beings or people in general, including men and women, okay? So this is the third section I would like you to focus on in your notes, and that is the ode to man. And it says here, many the wonders, but nothing is stranger than man. And another translation just says, of all the wonders in the world, the most wonderful thing is the human being. Look what is so wonderful and amazing about this human being. Among all animals, among everything in nature, human beings stand out as the most wonderful. This thing crosses the sea in the winter storm, making his path through the roaring waves. And the earth, he wears her away at the plows year to year, and his mules turn up the soil. So he commands the seas and commands the land. Right? And then look at the animals. He controls with craft the beast of the open air, walkers on hills. The horse with his shaggy mane he holds and harnesses, yoked about the neck, and the strong bull of the mountain, right? Tames the animals like the ox and the horse for working. Look at the other aspects of people, language and thought, philosophy, literature, right? And the feelings that govern his city, politics, all these ideas he has taught himself. He can always help himself. He faces no future helpless. There's only death that he cannot find and escape from. He has contrived refuge from illnesses once beyond all cure. All right, so shelter, food, can develop medicine, and we can even move 2,500 years into the future, come to the current day and think about all of our technological advances and putting a person on the moon and developing the computer and the mobile phone and on and on and on. And so this great poetic voice of the chorus that says about human beings, clever beyond all dreams, the inventive craft that he has. But here's the thing about human beings, even though they're so wonderful, they have the capacity to do great good, but they have an equal capacity to do great evil. So it says, look here, which may drive him one time to good and another to evil. So just a very long, interesting poem through the voice of the chorus, commenting on the human nature, what is everything amazing and wonderful about human beings, but also we know that human beings are capable of the worst things as well. Okay. All right. So we're moving on then. We're going on to the fourth section, which is a conversation now between Antigone and Creon. So the guard's like, hey, I said I was going to take off and never come back, but I'm so happy that I caught somebody, right? Antigone actually just came out and confessed. She said, I did it, so I'm off the hook here. So we caught her red-handed and she confessed to it. So the guard brings Antigone to Creon and says, I am free and I deserve full clearance of this charge. Okay. So the guard's off the hook. And so Creon is like, so you did this? And she said, yep. Did you not hear that? Did you not hear the edict? Did you know that I told you that it was against the law and that you would be put to death by stoning if you disobeyed my edict?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I knew about that. Of course I knew. The word was plain. Everybody knows exactly what the edict is, and I knew it, and I purposely uh, defied it." So she says, "Look, this edict came from you. And it did not come from Zeus, right? The king of the gods. It did not come from Justice, who lives with the gods below. Oh, I'm sorry, nor did that Justice who lives with the gods below mark out such laws to hold among mankind, right? So it was not a matter of justice. It did not come from the voice of God. This was your edict from just you, a particular human being. So I didn't think it was a just edict. I didn't think it was the command of God. It says, "Nor did I think your orders were so strong that you, a mortal man, could overrun the gods' unwritten and unfailing laws." Right? The gods have unwritten and unfailing laws. They have these eternal principles that hold the matters of justice. And your edict does not fit with that. All right. And so she says here, "Not now, nor yesterday's. They always live, and no one knows their origin in time. So not through fear of any man's proud spirit would I be likely to neglect these laws and draw on myself the gods' sure punishment." Look, the gods have set down these unwritten and unfailing, these universal principles that we are to follow. So why would I go against those and to listen to the edict of just an ordinary person? And so she says, "If I die before my time, I say it is gain." So she repeats in a much stronger way what she had said to her sister Ismene. And then she says, "Look, I've had a very sad life. I've lived through many sorrows. And so to me, death would be kind of a nice relief, right? So for me," she says, "death, that fate, there's no grief in that. But if I left that corpse, my mother's son, dead and unburied, I'd have cause to grieve, as now I grieve not." So I don't really mind. If I die, I die. But if I sat back and just let my mother's son just rot out there unburied, then I would have cause for real grief. "And if you think my acts are foolishness," she says, "the foolishness may be in a fool's eye." So maybe if you think what I'm doing is foolish, maybe you're the fool, right? Now, what's interesting here is, as I said, this play is a tragedy, and in a tragedy, we have a central convention is the tragic hero. Now, the tragic hero is somebody of high stature, usually like some type of king or ruler, some or wealthy person, a person of high stature, and they have some internal flaw. We call it the tragic flaw, known as harmatia, or often pronounced hamartia. This is where we get the word sin from. Harmatia is like if you shoot an arrow at a target, and instead of hitting the bullseye, you miss the mark. So missing the mark, falling short of perfection. This is the flaw. And often in the tragic hero, the flaw is hubris or pride. And so we can make a strong case here that Creon is the tragic hero of this play. He is the king at a high stature. He has an overwhelming sense of pride. This hubris or pride clearly seems to be his flaw. And in a tragedy, because of this flaw, the tragic hero will go through what is called the tragic fall. So the flaw leads to a fall. All right. And at that moment of there's a fall, and often there's a recognition where the tragic hero starts to realize that all of this trouble, either he dies or other people die, some tragedy happens where And what makes it tragic is that there's some type of terrible thing that happens because of the flaw. It's the pride of Creon that causes trouble. And then Creon will either have a moment of recognition or awareness where he starts to realize that he was the fault, that his flaw, his pride had caused this damage. Or the recognition can be sometimes in other characters or the audience. And as we see that tragic fall of the tragic hero because of the tragic flaw, there's something happens inside of us readers. We go through some type of catharsis where we start to kind of think like, wow, look at all these terrible things that are happening to this king. Once he's gone through this terrible tragedy, he's humanized. He comes down to our level, just like we saw with Emily Grierson in A Rose for Emily. Once she went through all kinds of sadness and loss, she came down off of her kind of pedestal of pride, and she was humanized and came down to our level. And once the hero comes down to our level, then we can identify with that. We have a connection at a human level with the hero. And by making that connection with the fallen hero, we get in touch with our own humanity. And that's the catharsis that happens. And so there's some type of like healing that takes place as we read a tragedy. Okay. So, yes, we can really focus on Creon as the tragic hero. But what's very interesting is you can also kind of think of this as a play that uniquely has two tragic heroes. In some ways, we see that Antigone is also demonstrating a type of pride where she says, I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to do what is right no matter what happens. Right. So we think of Brutus in the tragedy by Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Uh, when somebody tries to stand so firmly to their own sense of morality and refuses to give in or to adapt, there's something very admirable about that type of integrity and that type of conviction. But it can also be seen as a type of stubbornness or even foolishness. Now, maybe Antigone does not have that high status, or certain other features of a tragic hero do not fit her perfectly, but she does have many characteristics, including a sense of sticking to her guns, showing some type of stubbornness or pride. And what's the difference between Creon and Antigone? Is it just who do we think is right? They both think that they're right, and they both make a strong case for their point of view. And so it's difficult to see one as a protagonist and one as the antagonist. It's hard to see Creon as a villain. He seems like he's doing what is right for everybody. He's trying to think of the greater good. And so we've got these two heroes coming and into conflict. And that's what's so interesting about Antigone when you compare it to other tragedies, right? So that's her stance. She says, look, you call me a fool, but if I look foolish to you, maybe you're the fool. I know what I'm doing is right. I'm going to follow my own convictions. Well, Creon answers, well, I'm going to do that. He says to her, look, these rigid spirits are the first to fall. This is what's so ironic about this play is he says to Antigone, this type of stubbornness that you're showing, this type of rigid spirit, when you're that stubborn and you refuse to bend, you're going to break. The strongest iron hardened in the fire most often ends in scraps and shatterings. Who can think of pride? So he says, because of your stubborn pride, you're going to fall. And this is so ironic because he's going to get the exact same advice later from his son Haemon, and even from his advisor, his seer, prophet Teiresias. So he says, your stubborn pride, you're going to refuse to give in. If you don't bend, you're going to break. And then also he shows a little bit of masculine pride. He's saying, I'm not going to lose out to a woman. He says, she is my sister's child. So you see that Antigone is his niece, his sister's child. But he said, even if she were my own child, even if she was like even closer, no matter how close of a family member she were, right? If she were my own child, I still would stay true and do what is right. I would still try to put my duties as king above my personal feelings. And he goes, and while we're at it, I'm going to charge Ismene too. I'm going to charge both sisters because she was an accomplice to this crime. And he says, kind of in a masculine pride, no woman rules me while I live. Ismene shows loyalty to Antigone. She says, you know what? I'm willing to die with you. And Antigone says, no. First of all, I don't want you to do that because you refused to come out there and help me bury our brother. So don't try to take credit now. And also, I don't want you to go and die. So look, I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who's going to take the punishment for it. You don't even really deserve to take credit for doing it because you didn't. All right. And then we learn some information here that we learned that Antigone was going to be marrying Haemon. And Ismene says, are you going to kill your own son's promised bride? And Creon says, no, I would never choose a wicked wife for my son. And so death will help me break the marriage off. So we find out that Antigone is supposed to marry Haemon, but now the wedding is off. All right. So that's that fourth section, which is Antigone and Creon. And think about these two heroes in a sense, each standing firm and believing that they are on the side of good. They each believe that they're right, and they each believe some type of unyielding, unbending, stubborn pride. And they both show elements of being a tragic hero. They both have that hubris or pride. And so it's almost like we have double tragic heroes here, even though Creon fits the definitions and emerges as the really the most likely candidate, but we can even think of both of them as tragic heroes. All right, now I mentioned that Haemon was supposed to be marrying Antigone, and so the next important scene, this is scene 5, section 5, if you're counting. This is between Creon and his son. Now remember what Creon had just told Antigone about being too prideful. So Creon says, look, have you heard that I'm going to basically sentence your bride to death? So it's time to test your loyalty. Are you going to stay loyal to me, your father, or are you going to follow and do what you want with your own bride? And Haemon says, no, you're the father, and I'm going to follow you, and I'm not going to put a wedding or anything above my loyalty to you. And Creon says, that's good. Don't let your lust mislead your mind. Don't sell everything out for the sake of a woman. And he says here, look, if I allow disorder in my own house, I'd surely have to license it abroad. So just like as a king, I have to maintain order over the state, as a father, I have to maintain order over my house. And if I let order break down and if I allow disobedience in my own house, then I would then start to be an ineffective king, and I would allow disorder to take over on the state. So he says his point, there is no greater wrong than disobedience. Why? Because it ruins cities and it tears down homes. It breaks a society apart and leads to rebellion and chaos and anarchy. So he says, so I must guard the men who yield to order and not let myself be beaten by a woman. Better, if it must happen, that a man should overset me. I won't be called weaker than womankind. So he lays down his law again to his son and says, I need to be strong. I'm not going to be beaten by some woman. I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to stand firm on what I believe to be true. Now, notice Haemon has a very subtle thing, which is I want to be respectful of my father, and I want to obey my father, but I believe that he's wrong. So how do I show respect and obedience, but also bring it to my father's attention? So I like the kind of subtle way that Haemon is trying to say. He says, look, Father, the gods have given men good sense, the highest and the best possession that we have, our sense of reasoning, our common sense, our conscience, our sense of right and wrong. This is the greatest gift that the gods have given to us, right? This moral capacity, the ability to choose between right and wrong. That was also brought up in that Ode to Man. He says, but look, there's not too many people that are willing to tell you the truth. You're gonna have a lot of people just kind of doing whatever you say because your presence frightens the common man from saying the truth. People are too afraid to tell you the truth. But I can tell that a lot of people do not agree with what you're doing. They think it's unjust, it's unfair, even immoral how you're treating Antigone. And so he says, I love you, Dad, but here's what I want to say. And he says, do not have one mind and one alone. Don't just think that you're right. You need to listen to wisdom, listen to wise counsel, listen to the advice of other people and consider it. Don't just do whatever you think is right. Do not be stubborn. He says, whoever thinks that he alone is wise, his eloquence, his mind above the rest, come the unfolding. It shows his emptiness. If you think that you're better than everybody else and that you're the only one who knows what is good, then it shows your emptiness. A man, though wise, should never be ashamed of learning more and must not be too rigid. See the irony there? Creon had just told Antigone that her rigidity was going to basically be her downfall. She was being too stubborn. And now Haemon says, don't be stubborn. Don't be too rigid. You need to listen to advice. He says, line 675, yield your wrath, allow a change of stand. Young as I am, if I may give advice, I'd say it would be best if men were born perfect in wisdom, right? But we're not. So please take my advice and follow good sense. And the dad gets all upset and says, I'm going to follow you're just a kid. I'm big and you're dumb. I'm little. I'm smart. You're dumb, right? I'm not going to listen to you. And Haman's like, well, you're the one being childish here, right? Yes, I am younger than you are, but you need to listen to the words that I'm speaking. Don't look at my age. Think about the wisdom of my advice. If you're going to sit there and just go all on your own, right? Then you said you're going to rule in a desert. You'd rule a desert beautifully alone, right? If you're a leader and nobody's following you, right? So you could go out there in a desert by yourself and be a leader. If you're going to just if that's all you're going to do is follow your own voice. And so he starts to being accusing him of being disobedient for not listening to his father. And Haman's trying to say, I am trying to listen to you, but I'm trying to give you some good advice and tell you to kind of reconsider. And Haman gets up, says, you'll never see me yield to shame. And so they have this big fight, and Haman storms off and said, look, you're never going to see me again. Now, once Haman's gone, though, you can see that his counsel, his advice actually sinks in. And Creon starts thinking about it after he's angry at first, but then he kind of calms down and thinks about what his son said. And he goes, okay, I'm not going to stone Antigone to death. I'm going to go put her in a cave, and then she can live her whole life in exile. Keep her alive. And if she wants to die, she can kill herself. If she wants to live, she can live. I'll leave it up to her. It's her choice, but I won't kill her. So he does give in. All right. And so there's this final confrontation between Creon and Antigone. He says, look, I'm going to let you go live in exile. All right. Now, the next scene I want to show you is advice that's given by this prophet and seer, this blind seer named Teiresias. And he gives advice very similar to Haman, but Teiresias is now the older one. Teiresias is a lot older than Creon. So you think Creon should listen to his elders, and also Teiresias is respected as a wise person. And he goes, you got to be very careful here. You're balanced on a razor's edge, line 910. You're balanced on the razor's edge. This could go either way. He goes, think of these things, my son. Think of these things, my son. All men may err. And Teiresias is not technically the father, the biological father. He just means son as a sign of endearment that, look, I'm the wise person, you're the younger person. So think of these things, my son. All men may err. We all make mistakes, right? It's not, you're not a fool if you make mistakes, but if you don't learn from your mistakes and you keep repeating them, then you start to become foolish. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. In fact, that's the only way that we can succeed, is to fail. We fail and then we learn something and we try again and we make improvements and then eventually we succeed, right? You're not a fool and you're not a failure if you make mistakes, because as long as you can change your mind and grow and learn, then it's a good thing. But he says stubbornness and stupidity are twins. All right. Ignorance means you don't know something. To be wise means you admit your ignorance, you admit you don't know something, then you learn something and you grow. That's wise. But if you are ignorant on purpose, like you don't want to learn anything, you don't want to learn from your mistakes, then that's not ignorance. That's called stupidity. Now, ignorance can easily be fixed, but stupidity cannot. So stubbornness and stupidity are twins. Learning from a wise counselor is not pain if what he speaks are profitable words. Look, lower your pride, listen to my advice. I'm an old wise person. I know what I'm talking about, and you should listen to me. But Creon won't. He says, yes, old Teiresias, human beings fall, the clever ones the furthest, when they plead a shameful case so well in hope of profit. Look, so he starts to insult Teiresias and said, like, you're not giving me good counsel. And Teiresias says, the best of all possessions is good counsel. And Creon answers, and so is foolishness the worst of all. So Teiresias says, all right, well, you're not listening to my advice, so let me just give you a prophecy here, right? The sun won't roll its course many more days before you come to give corpse for these corpses, child of your own loins. There's going to be a lot of death and destruction here. You're heading for a lot of sorrow if you don't change your mind and change your course. He says, the time is close when men and women shall wail within your house. Straight up line 990. And he does the same thing he does with Haemon, right? Once Teiresias is gone and Creon settles down, he starts to think about what Teiresias just said. And he says, you know what? I don't like being wrong. I hate giving in. But to stand against him and shatter my spirit is doom is dreadful too. So as much as I hate to admit it, Teiresias is right. So he says, go, I'm going to go free Antigone. I'm going to let her out of her little prison. And I'm going to go ahead and bury Polynices. All right. So the thing is that Creon is not a totally bad person. He kind of fights, he defends himself, but after the dust settles, he lets it sink in. He changes his mind. Remember, he backed off and decided to let Antigone live in exile. Then he backs off again here and says, okay, I'm just going to pardon her. She can go and live free, and I will go ahead and bury her brother. But unfortunately, because this is a Greek tragedy, right? So that scene 6 is between Teiresias and Creon, right? And now we look at the final part here, the 7th part I want to focus on, and that is the final, basically the fate, the results of Creon's stubbornness, right? What happens? And in typical tragedy, it's like he gets more punishment than he probably deserves, right? We find out that Haemon, his son, is now dead, that he's killed himself, and then Haemon's mother, this is the wife of Creon, Eurydice, she comes in and she finds out that her son Haemon is gone. And we see here that we find out that Antigone had hanged herself, caught in a noose of her own linen. So Antigone had gave up hope, whatever, or wanted to go be with her family in death. So she hangs herself. Haemon, of course, is so distraught by that. He sees her dead. It says he tried to take out a sword and kill his father with it. He missed his swipe of his sword. I don't know. And then he basically runs his body onto the sword. It doesn't seem as is it an accident. Seems like he intentionally just thrust the sword. So at the hand of his own sword, Haemon kills himself. And it says he tries to have take his last embrace with the maiden. This is kind of graphic. He hugs her as he's dying. He gasps out blood. He spits up blood all over her white neck, her white cheek. Basically spits blood in her face. And then he dies. So now we've got his dead body now on top of Antigone's dead body. And they said to Creon, well, you think that's bad? He says, you have learned justice, though it comes too late. So don't you think that's bad? Well, I've got some terrible news here. Now your wife's dead too. She was so upset that Haemon was dead that she killed herself. He says, Master, you hold one sorrow in your hands, but you have more stored up inside the house. Your wife has died. Okay, how'd she die? There by the altar, dying on the sword, her eyes fell shut. So she dies on the sword as well. She wept her older son. See, she blames Creon. See, her older son, Megareus, has already died, and now she's lost her other son. And so she's so distraught at that she kills herself. So she said she cursed you as the killer of her children. So this is all of the damage done because of Creon. This is the fallout of and this awareness, this recognition. So even though Creon does not die, we see this tragic fall where Creon starts to realize what he has done and sees all the damage caused by his stubborn pride. His refusal to show critical thinking and reasoning and to listen to good, wise counsel and good advice. All right. And so we get to the closing lines then. It says, my life is warped past cure. Fate unbearable has leaped down on my head. And so that's the recognition where he realizes what he has done. And the course has the last word, gives us a little bit of parting advice. Our happiness depends on wisdom all the way. The gods must have their due. Great words by men of pride bring greater blows upon them. So wisdom comes to the old. Okay, so that's the play Antigone. Okay, and that brings us to the close of our collection of literature focusing on crime and justice. We looked at the poems and the stories and the plays. And so now we're going to look later at the final theme, which is freedom and confinement.